So we like to use hedgerows at our farm. We find them very valuable. They provide a nice break between the annual crops. They're a form of our pest control strategy. They give us higher crop yields and just provide more diversity at the farm. But you can see here that all of our crop rows we do with fruit trees. So the dominant species is always the fruit trees in here. And this is a mixture of trees. We got stone fruit in here and also apple trees. But every hedgerow is a little different. There's we have some pomegranates. But typically we try not to have just one same variety of tree in there. We try to mix it up. And underneath in the understory, we like to grow different assortments of perennial flowers and herbs, but also annuals as well, annual flowers and herbs. And I think, if you've learned from permaculture or agroforestry, there's a big focus on just using more so perennial crops in hedgerows, but I think it's probably good to have just annuals too. And we've actually experimented with, at the new site, with a brand new hedgerow. We'll actually plant out completely with annuals first and let them seed out, or flower and seed out, drop their seeds. And then in the second season we come in and then we plant in like 1-year-old, 2-year-old perennial herbs and flowers that are already, somewhat big. And then we allow those to grow, and we find that in the gap areas we'll have all those annuals just sprouting on their own. We don't have to even plant anything. And it's been working pretty well. I think people sometimes get dogmatic and they think, oh, I just got to have just perennials in here. But I think a good combination is good. I mean, definitely you want to have perennials. We got, like in this bed, for instance, we have asparagus coming up here and some yarrow, along with the fruit trees. But we also have calendula, California poppies. I think there's a little bit of thyme in here, oregano. So really it kind of depends on your area. And I think it depends on what you're trying to sell, like what works good for you at your local markets. But we've really focused more on like culinary herbs and more like herbal, medicinal herbs. And but yeah, that's just our context. You got to kind of figure out what works for your area.
Cool. So I mean, it is dedicated space that is probably less yielding in terms of a financial reward for your farm.
For sure.
In terms of the direct relationship, but you're saying that there's a lot of benefit for diversity, pest control and stuff like that. That's kind of not easy to measure in a sense.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's hard to fully measure that, I suppose. But I think whatever you're not getting for like not having an annual crop here, you're getting other benefits that actually are helping you get better yields in your annual beds. So it's hard to really factor that in because, like, yeah, maybe we're not getting as much here, but we're getting more out of our other beds because of this. So it's hard to really say. Okay.
Do you think one other part of the strategy with the annuals is maybe you plant annuals while your perennials are getting established too? Is that could be a benefit?
Yeah. So yeah, kind of like what I was mentioning. If you plant the perennials, but you also have some annuals growing too, and that way you get some quick upfront profit while the trees are growing. So yeah, that's another good strategy.
Okay, and what sort of spacing are we talking about here? What's been working, and are you taking the same thing over the new farm?
Yeah, so it's basically every 50 feet we put a hedgerow, every 10 beds.
And it's the same size as your normal bed?
Yeah, this is built in the same way. It's a lasagna bed. It's the same width. It's a 4-foot bed, just like our annual beds. And yeah, we build it, and then it's a permanent bed, just like all the other ones.
Okay, let's talk about maintenance a little bit here. So you have perennials, obviously, that are going to be living, and then the annuals are talking, a lot of them are self-seeding.
Right.
Okay, but what about in terms of like fertility or mulching and stuff like that?
Okay, yeah. So we come in and we add some mulch in here, or compost mulch. And we do that at least once a year, maybe twice a year. A lot of times, like when some of the perennials go dormant in the wintertime, we'll come in and just kind of cap that area with some compost. or just around the tree, the base of the tree, any of the gaps where there's just a little bit of space, we'll just, around the plants, just add in some compost.
So it sounds like you kind of have a formula at this point that's been working well. I mean, a lot of these hedgerows kind of look similar.
Yeah.
What sort of like formula do you have here in terms of like tree spacing, like, you know, like different things going on underneath? Is there anything you could recommend?
Yeah. So the first hedgerows that we planted, I think I did the tree spacing a little too close. I was doing like 11 to 12 foot spacing, and it's probably better to do maybe like a 14 to 15, but it really depends on what kind of trees you're growing. We're growing mostly semi-standard trees that are going to get pretty big. But if you're growing dwarfs, then you could go tighter, obviously.
So what about underneath here? Is there sort of a formula for what you're planting under here?
For me, there wasn't really a direct formula per se. It was just different herbs and flowers that I knew grew in this area well, and some of them native, and just trying to work with what works here.
Oh, so, yeah, I can't be like, yeah, Jared, give me advice for North Carolina, like you're in California, so.
It's probably different, yeah. So initially, you can kind of see it, I set up just a regular drip system in here, just like the other beds. And that works really good, but I noticed over the years that sometimes the trees need a little bit more. So I actually ran a main line down the bed here, and I have individual drip lines that just go around the base of the tree. So whenever I want, I can give the trees an extra really deep soak if I need to. And it's mostly during the summertime that I would have to do that. But other than that, the whole bed is just irrigated through drip, just like all the other beds, just in the same way. So this is another example of another hedgerow here. And this one has kind of the same crops, but also some borage, starflower. There's a little bit of chamomile in here, more asparagus, more calendula. And you can see some of those annual crops, they're sprouting super densely just on their own. This year and the previous years, I haven't actually transplanted anything into this for a long time now. It's just all on its own.
So I'm seeing this kind of style pop up on some more farms now, and I think there's a lot of research to be done, and it's very contextual.
For sure. Yeah, I think it's wide open right now. This is like a new frontier, really. There's so many different plant combinations that you could experiment with and trial. There's really no set formula. It's more just based on what you're trying to do at your farm, what works in your area, what plants are marketable. You just got to consider so many factors into what makes the hedgerow. That's what makes it fun too, because it's really, if you're into like experimenting with that kind of a thing, it's really exciting.
Cool. And I see tons of balance on your farm, Jared. I mean, not just between your annual beds and your hedgerows, but even in the hedgerows, I mean, some of this is stuff that's just for beneficials, and some of it's actually for production.
That's right.
So there's just a ton of balance here, which seems to be working really well for you.
Yeah, it's been working good.
Is this something you've like really nerded out on, or is this like a side project? Like, how much effort goes into this?
Into the hedgerows?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I've nerded out on it for sure. Like, really what got me into it was just reading more like into permaculture and agroforestry. And I love fruit trees. So I wanted to really, a lot of, like, traditionally people either grow an orchard or they grow vegetables, but I felt like, hey, we can do both. And I really came to that conclusion just by, like I was saying, reading about agroforestry. And I felt like we could really merge all that together. And here we are. I mean, I think this is definitely, I think, something that more and more people are going to start doing into the future.
Awesome.